It's really good to be here today with Ed Merrow from IPA International. In some ways, it's a shame we're here because we were hoping to have Ed in the UK for a seminar next week on reimagining benchmarking, but thanks to COVID, Ed's in the States. Jonathan and I are here in London. But we thought it would be a good opportunity just to introduce some of the themes we're hoping to pick up on in the seminar in advance of the rescheduled date, which we hope will happen in March, COVID permitting. And I guess that's quite a big uncertainty. I mean, we might talk about uncertainty as we go forward. But perhaps before we begin with the questions in earnest, Ed, could you tell us a little bit about perhaps your background and the work you've been doing with IPA International over the last, well, I guess, couple of decades, really? And
yes, 34 years actually. IPA, Independent Project Analysis, benchmarks capital projects and capital project systems for industrial companies. Our primary focus has always been oil, chemicals, minerals, pharmaceuticals, companies that spend a great deal of capital to create their business assets. And if they don't spend that capital well, they find themselves out of business or absorbed by others. So over the years, we've seen a number of companies leave the scene. I remember the late, great ICI, which I guess is still around, but only kind of. We are a quantitative company, so we're very much empirical benchmarkers. We collect data very, very carefully, and we collect data with the project team. So over the years, we've collected over 20,000 capital projects with a capital value of over 5 trillion, so US dollars. It's quite a lot of money, and it's enormously fun. I mean, that's, I guess, of all the things I would say about at IPA, if you love projects, IPA is a great place for you, because I always say we get to see more projects in a typical year than a typical project manager sees in a career. And the best part of it is we don't have to do them.
always
so, So, I mean, our clientele are most of big oil, most of big chemicals, big minerals, major pharmaceutical companies, and so forth. And we work with them to try and improve the way they spend capital. The other thing that we do, and to me, it's always been the engine that has made us successful. I have about 50 full-time professionals who do nothing but research on capital project practices, trying to understand what it is about what we do as owners in particular that will give us better results. Our orientation is very much more to the owner side, to the investor side, than it is to the supply chain. That's one of the things I think that probably causes a fair amount of disagreement between IPA and the way projects are often approached in Britain, where I think you put more emphasis on the contractors and much less emphasis on owners and owner behavior.
Perhaps I can lead us on nicely into the theme of the seminar, because we were down to talk about reimagining benchmarking, and when you and I have spoken before, Ed, you've stressed very much that when you think about, I guess, the challenge of reimagining benchmarking, at least from a UK perspective, it probably is in that owner space, and there's an important distinction for you between benchmarking those capabilities and benchmarking, I guess, the outcomes, benchmarking the performance. And perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about that and the implications.
Well, it's interesting because companies and organizations benchmark for a number of different reasons. Some of those reasons are good reasons, and some of those reasons are, it's not that they're bad reasons, they're just not very effective reasons. So, for example, I've had some companies come to benchmark their capital project system in order to prove how good they are.
Right.
Ooh, that's dangerous, okay? Because you might actually find out how good you are. And it might be actually quite disappointing. Um, I have some companies that engage in what I would call industrial tourism.
Right.
Uh, they like to go around and chat with people, and they call it benchmarking, and that's fine, and it's good for the beleaguered travel industry, I guess, but it's not good for much else. Then there are owners who benchmark within the context of their overall quality system.
Right.
They're trying to integrate benchmarking into continuous improvement. They tend to be very successful in benchmarking. But too many companies and organizations that want to benchmark focus too much on the outcomes of their projects and too little on why am I getting those outcomes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the thing that I've always believed is really critical in benchmarking is to be able to connect what you do and what you get.
Yeah.
And to connect it in a way that's utterly convincing, where you can simply look at the data and you can't deny that certain behavior, certain practices will give you better results.
So,
You
so I,
just have to have the discipline to do it.
So, on that note, I've read your excellent and very readable book on industrial mega projects, and there is a a very clear correlation between what you call front end loading and project outcomes. And again, could you perhaps expand a little on that, because that seemed very crucial in your thinking to me in that book.
Right. One of the difficulties in managing capital project systems, so being the organization responsible for a series of capital projects over time, is that you have an enormous lag between the time that you start a project and the time that you finally get all of the results of the project in. That has always been what makes the it's unlike managing operations. With operations management, you get almost immediate feedback. I mean, in fact, many operating managers get real-time feedback on how they're doing. In capital projects, we don't. And so if what you do is try to spend your time focusing on outcomes, you're always managing by driving the bus while looking in the rearview mirror.
I see.
It's never really what's going to happen next. Our focus is, we have found over the years that good owners make good projects, that when the owners know how to put together the project, starting with the business objectives, and then cooperating amongst themselves to be coherent in those objectives, and then doing the front end preparation. We always complain that nothing ever goes according to plan. Well, actually, when it comes to successful mega projects, things actually do go pretty close to plan. But the reason is the plan is workable. That is, the plan is feasible. And what we find with a lot of large projects, both public and private, is that the projects have already failed before they started.
And
Before the first shovel was put in the ground, the projects failed.
And is that why because one of the things I found fascinating in your book was that, you had a kind of cluster of really, really quite successful mega projects, quite a lot of failures, well, a lot of failures, and,
Mm-hmm.
and very little in the middle. Is this why you have this sort of, it's not quite binary, but almost binary distinction
It
between
is. It's
good and bad?
almost bimodal. Or the way I put it is, there are precious few solidly mediocre mega projects. They tend to be either very good or they tend to be really quite horrendous. And the reason is that the projects, large complex projects, tend to come apart on us. They, if the plan that we've created up front can't really be adhered to because it is too heroic for humans to actually implement, well, the project doesn't degrade gracefully. It simply comes apart. And the supply chain can't provide what's needed. We get to fighting with each other. We begin the finger pointing process, and we end up, with probably accusing the wrong people of the wrong things, but with a mess on our hands. This happens with large complex projects almost 2/3 of the time. Um, what I think is remarkable is when you look at the third of projects that are successful, they have so much in common. Now, one of the things they don't have in common is that they are intrinsically easier than the failed projects. No, some of them are enormously complex, very, very challenging projects, but they were put together on the front end by their sponsors, knowing that the sponsor work was going to be critical to the outcome.
Yeah.
The way I put it is the contractors do good projects well and bad projects poorly, and that's not a tautology.
Mm-hmm.
It's really the way it goes. We love to blame the contractors for our shortcomings, and it just doesn't get you good projects.
No, no. And so carry on, Ed. Please
But
carry on.
but
Okay.
benchmarking is really about understanding deeply how you as a sponsor are approaching your projects, whether you are systematically getting all of the needed parts of your organization to cooperate in making a successful project, and then whether you're following a set of practices that will make the project as resilient as possible. I mean, look, things always happen in execution that are surprises. But project management, I would argue, is the science of planning combined with the art of reacting creatively to surprises. If there are too many surprises, the project management just doesn't work. If you don't do the science part, which is the planning part, then you get overwhelmed with changes. The changes are what simply undermine the effectiveness of your projects.
So I guess just about everybody listening to this is a project professional, and they would all sort of violently agree with you that good planning is essential. But you're telling us that it looks like in about 2/3 of cases, there's there's plenty of evidence that that's not the case. So what's happening? Why aren't projects doing what there's good evidence they should be doing?
And of course, that, Andrew, is the right question. Okay, I mean, because
Glad to ask the right question.
it's quite true that as project professionals, we know we should do a good job in preparing the projects. So why don't we? And it isn't a problem of ignorance. It is a problem of the way that owner organizations function. And they frequently struggle to get all of their needed parts, their functional organization, to actually cooperate with the endeavor. I mean, I'll never forget a wonderful conversation with the CEO of a super major oil company that will remain unnamed. Um, and he asked me why they were struggling with their large projects. Um, and I had described how to do projects well and so forth. And his comment was, well, that's rather banal. I thought that was kind of over the top, but
A bit
nonetheless,
rude, but there you go.
yeah. But then I said, look, you can't do your projects because you can't cooperate with yourself. And I'll never forget, he sat there absolutely still and said, yeah, that's right. And that's the problem. Okay. And you see, that's where I think the missing ingredient, and the more I've seen projects, the more I've thought about it. The missing ingredient in large complex projects is they require leaders rather than project managers. Project managers tend to be quite transactional. Project managers are very, very good at organizing things. They're very, very good at getting assignments made and in the right order and so forth. The large complex projects need leadership that can induce people to cooperate. I've always thought when you think about the term leader, you really shouldn't be talking about leadership. You should be talking about the ability to induce followership. And you see, a lot of these projects require cooperation from lots of people, many of whom outrank the project director, many of whom don't in any way, shape, or form, they're not even part of the project director's organization. So the effect is you've got to be able to articulate a vision and make people want to come with you.
And I suppose trying to pull this back to the theme of benchmarking, can you benchmark that leadership capability? That sounds quite a hard thing.
Actually, you can. And there are a set of traits, and they're observable traits, they're measurable traits that are associated with better leaders. One of them is what's called emotional intelligence. So people who are good at using emotions to get people to cooperate, people who score higher on those scales are better project directors, plain and simple.
And and at IPA International, you benchmark those capabilities?
And we do indeed. We benchmark those traits as well. And you see, those traits aren't needed for more routine projects. And unfortunately, the way we promote people is when you're good at a medium-sized project, we tend to promote you into doing the very large, difficult projects, and that may or may not be successful. That's the problem.
That's a problem. So I guess we're running a little bit short on time, so I'll kind of bring this back to the UK. When you sort of look at the UK scene, where hopefully you'll be with us in March, and perhaps particularly thinking about the public sector, we've got a Prime Minister talking about build, build, build. We've got a couple of mega projects like HS2 still running, or Crossrail is still running as well. What do you see when you look at the UK, when you compare it to good practices around the world in your database?
I guess the one characteristic of the UK that causes me a certain amount of angst is that I think there's a tendency on the part of project sponsors to think of themselves as clients. In fact, that's typically the word that is used. And I think that's really the wrong orientation. You are, as the sponsor of a project, you are the owner. It belongs to you. It is your responsibility and accountability. So be private or public makes no difference at all in that regard. It's absolutely essential that you be able to act as an owner. And that's really it. What we benchmark above all else is that owner behavior.
And perhaps to finish, are there perhaps 1, 2, 3 bullet points you would say of the absolute key capabilities to be a good, capable owner?
Number one, be able to form coherent objectives for the project. Now, and when I say coherent, I mean frequently objectives are all clear as can be, but they don't cohere, which is to say, taken together, they make no sense. So they contain conflicts or they contain targets that can't be achieved by humans. So that's number one. Number two, look at how you're putting your project teams together. We measure that. It's really important. Be sure the right people are there and have the right say at the right time. And three, prepare every single project to the same high level of preparation so that what you transition to a contractor is a project that contractor can do successfully. When you don't do any of those three things, you end up with, very inefficient capital projects.
That's great. Well, that's been a fascinating rattle through a pretty broad range of topics. Thanks, Ed. I very much hope we'll see you in the UK again soon.
I really do hope that I'll see you in London in March.
Me too.
I don't know about you, but I like my study here, but I'm getting a little tired of it.
I know exactly how you feel. I'm getting cabin fever as well.
Yeah. So cheers, everybody, and thanks a lot for listening.